we kind of sweep them up into rows and mow them in, or in my case, I just blow them into where the cover crop is, and all that moisture and humidity kind of rots them. And so we're actually eliminating that habitat for the navel orange worm to overwinter in. Another really cool thing is mating disruption, or as my cousin, she called it insect cock blocks. So that's a pheromone that is either, sorry if I offended anybody, I don't know if that's funny. A pheromone that either is in some sort of lure or a trap that's out in the orchard or the little cover box, and it puts out that pheromone and it confuses the moths so that actually the males and the females cannot find each other. This is all really great science that if anybody wants to go into entomology, like there's so much cool work that can be done in agriculture. And then there's a bit of thinking outside of the box, I had this experience in our young trees when they're 1 to 2 years old, you don't harvest the nuts. But you can get some nuts on there, right? Just a few. It's not worth going in. And it's a little bit of a pain in the pain in the butt to go in. Sorry. Pain in the butt to go in and take all those nuts off during the winter. It's a little tedious job. So I noticed in my orchard that I had a lot of ants, and it was the type of ants that eat the almonds. And initially I was like, God, you should really control that because that's going to be a problem when I go, when my trees are producing. But they were even going up in the tree, which usually doesn't happen. They eat the nuts right out of the tree. But then I said, wait a second, I want to get rid of these nuts. It's like 3 nuts on this tree, 4 nuts on that tree. So I'm going to let the ants do the job for me, and they did. They took care of all my mummies. And then this year, when we did have a problem, I knocked them out. So I was like, sorry, I was like the equal opportunist employer, and then I became like the jerk employer because I killed them. So, but like I said, thinking outside the box, and maybe using something that you see as bad to your advantage sometimes. The takeaway with a lot of these practices is that the initial investment can sometimes be daunting for the farmer to be unaffordable. Orchard recycling, incredibly expensive. The kind of equipment they have to bring in, it costs $2,500 just to move in the equipment, not even to use it, just to move it there, right? And it's really fortunate that we do have a couple areas where farmers can get help to pay for some of those expenses with grants from like Air Resources or CDFA, which is the California Department of Food and Agriculture. So, but the trade-off for doing these practices is that you have a more stable system. You're finding more balance. You're gaining longevity. And this brings me back to the trade-offs, right? As I said, there's no smoking gun culprit, there's no silver bullet savior, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to any of this. Every grower has a unique path that gets them to sustainability and the climate-smart ag practices that are going to work for their operation. And these things don't happen overnight. Sometimes it can take years for things to get off the ground. I mean, think about it. 10 years ago, hardly anybody was cover cropping, and this year, I think we have over 200,000 acres that are now being cover cropped here in the valley, and maybe even more, right? For some of us, it may be the ability to do ground recharge, and for others, with a flood irrigation. And some people look at flood irrigation, it's like, oh, that's a waste of water, but it actually is valuable to you look at it in terms of recharge. In fact, that's one of the reasons why where we live, we don't have severe problems with groundwater and subsidence, is because we flooded for so long, and so we were continually recharging. And as it turns out, almond land, a lot of almonds are on land that is ideal for recharge in the winter, and it doesn't harm the trees. But other growers may not have that option, but they may use something like subsurface drip irrigation, which actually is a very efficient way to deliver water and nutrients to trees. You actually cut out some of your evaporative losses. So the trade-offs are part of every decision that we make in agriculture. And I'm going to give you another few examples with cover cropping, which is great, as I've explained. I mean, I love it, but it does require extra mowing, extra labor, more tractor hours, more fossil fuels, right? Does wonders for the soil. So many other things that I have mentioned. Yeah, you know what else is great for? Overpopulations. Gophers love those same roots that all those soil microbes love. You know, they make a mess out of the orchard floor by excavating massive tunnel systems and you know, only what I could call like gopher McMansions under the ground. These huge mounds, and it makes an uneven orchard floor, and so when you go to harvest, you might lose some nuts, or you're grading with dust, which we're trying to eliminate. And sometimes they actually damage the irrigation system, and especially ones that are underground, so that sometimes the farmer actually has to abandon that system and completely above ground, which is very unfortunate. They eat the roots of young trees and they do a lot of damage in a newly planted orchard. So, you know, all these bad things can be the result of great practice, which is unfortunate. So you have this, you know, your options are like, okay, poison, okay, that's bad. We don't like poison. Time-consuming and not scaled large enough. Flood irrigation again, and a good pack of dogs, which is, by the way, what I was doing right before I came here, and what I will continue doing once I go home. My brother's covering for me right now. But is it a waste of water? Especially if it's well timed and will coincide with my planting of my cover crop that I will get established this fall and will take all through next year. So you have to be a little bit smart and well timed with how you do things. Okay, so as for the water trade-off, the industry has been moving from flood irrigation to micro sprinkler and micro drip. I mean, we've already reduced the amount of water that almonds use by 33% in the last 20 years, which is a lot. And you know, we've led in this area. Okay, so the benefits of micro irrigation are many. I mean, you get really nice, evenly growing orchards because you really do have a handle on how much water is distributed and how much fertilizer is distributed to those plants. I mean, there's a lot of accuracy involved. So, and as you can see here, this is our orchard, and even though it looks like bare soil, like, oh, it's barren. Actually, 2 months earlier, that had 5-foot-tall mustard cover crop in it. And then I mowed it down and I tilled it into the soil. So I started, you know, this process of building my soil. But then summer came and I just left it there. Because you know what? I don't want to grow weeds. I only need enough water for these little tiny trees. I don't want to grow a bunch of weeds there. They're going to compete with my trees, at least this year. In the winter, I don't mind so much. But, you know, I don't want them to compete, and I don't want to have to use herbicide if I don't have to. And so this sort of system allows for that. And it actually allows for me to just apply fertilizer exactly where I need it. So even though we did the whole orchard recycling in this orchard, because it was just the first year, that nitrogen wasn't ready to be released. It's being released now because the trees are big. But here I still had to apply small amounts every so often just to stay on top of it. Let's see. Sprinklers also help you reduce, because if you could really monitor how much water goes on, you can also reduce something like whole rot, which is a disease of overwater, happens mostly in overwatered trees. And if you really want to stay on top of things, with these sort of systems, you can time your applications to be in off-peak hours. So so that you're taking pressure off the electrical grid, especially during heat waves. And if you're doing it at night, you're also preventing some of the evaporative losses that come during the heat of the day. There is a downside, though, to micro sprinklers and micro irrigation. As much as it saves us water, you know, you can have the dust issue, which I really had to be very careful here. In this orchard, I didn't want any of these to grow because I didn't want to mow on bare dirt, because that would just introduce all this dust to my trees. So fortunately, nothing grew in the centers because it was dry as well. And I didn't have to do any of that, and I didn't end up with a mite problem. But the downside to losing flood is that, you know, again, you're not recharging your groundwater. And, you know, you're flushing, it allows you to flush salts that may accumulate in the soil down below the root zone, that flood water. Controlling rodent population and establishing cover crops. So these are the downside, you know, of having this super efficient targeted irrigation system. So we're going to get back to water, you know, which is always the biggest elephant in the room. So we've all heard that statistic about almonds, 3 gallons of water per nut, which we actually got that down to 1 gallon because we said, well, look, you know, there's 3 different things here. The almond is only, you know, this much, right? A third of it. And then we have the shell, and then we have the hull. The hull is technically the fruit. I mean, they didn't even factor in the woody, you know, the woody tree, right? So, you know, we've heard that statistic a million times, and they always leave out some like this one major detail that all food takes water to grow, right? And especially anything that is nutrient dense, like proteins, takes more water. So something like a legume or a bean actually takes more water because it is nutrient dense. You know, and then you could scale up and go like eggs, and then all protein. But that's animals, and there's a whole other thing. And you know, curiously, no one ever complains about strawberries or kale, right? Or decorative pumpkins, which nobody eats, and they literally just rot on your doorstep, or flowers. But you know, the point here is that I'm not saying this to criticize any other crop, but to make the point that if you wanted to, you could demonize everything that is, you could find something bad about every single thing that is from, you know, there is no perfect food, there is no perfect crop. And so the question becomes, how do we produce more with less or limited resources? The answer is efficiency and accuracy. And that comes down to good science, which is why we're here, right? It's all about the science. I mean, it's either on the biological level, if you're looking at, you know, evapotranspiration, soil health, microbial communities, whole orchard cycling, rootstock development, or, you know, all those outside the box methods that I was talking about before. And then if you're on the engineering side of it, there's the equipment, whether it's in the technology sector, or you're looking at, you know, irrigation technology that's bringing in all this information from the field, like the weather sensors, the soil information, the actual plant needs, and it's making these models to tell you exactly how much to irrigate and when to do it. Or like the spray technology that I was talking about, or equipment that is used and helps soil health, right? These are all opportunities out there for you guys to go into, and they will make huge differences. And don't forget about technology, right? Bugs are good. So I just, you know, wanted to make sure you guys were aware of the career opportunities. It's a very rich space at this point in time. And then we get to zero waste. So I talked about the almond hull, and the hull we've been using in the dairy industry for quite some time. I've been a member of the biomass committee, and we were tasked with finding uses and better uses for our two other crops. And we don't call them byproducts anymore. We actually call them food products, right? Because they do have value. If we put water into that, well, I think it should be something that isn't looked at as waste, but given value. That does take some research, which we've done a lot of funding. So you would be hard pressed, if you were to look at a lot of other crops, you would be hard pressed to find a crop that is as zero waste as almonds. And it starts with the fact that we are able to go into our orchards and remove almost the entire crop. And it's because of the way we harvest. So virtually nothing is left behind. And the other part of that equation is that the almond is protected in this shell, this hull. It's actually not very perishable. And just with, you know, a little bit of cold storage or in your freezer, it really lasts forever. So we don't have, I mean, think about it. You go by a field that had melons in it, or a field or an orchard with peaches, and you see how many get left behind. And it's not a criticism of those crops. It's just the unfortunate nature of those crops, that they are vulnerable, they're easily damaged, and they are very perishable. So there's a very small window to get them out of the field to the market, to your refrigerator, in your mouth, you know, before they're no longer good. So we don't have that problem with the almond. We're very fortunate. Even the stuff that is considered low quality or, you know, not good enough for market or damaged, we have uses for that. Some of the stuff goes to oil stock and then it ends up in cosmetics. Even the skin that they take off when they blanch nuts and they take the skin off, that actually has a lot of nutritional value in it, and they have purposes for that. So the nut itself, really, there's no part of it that gets wasted. And now we're actually looking at beyond dairy, looking at feeding hulls, and we've done research to poultry. There's a lot of benefits, a lot of antioxidants in those hulls. And you can look at it as like, okay, it's a food source, but you can also look at it in terms of, well, a lot of water went into making that hull. And now we're sharing our water footprint with other industries. So because you can put in about, you can replace, I think, 12% feed on a dairy cow, well, that's 12%, you know, less that you have to rely on corn silage or alfalfa, which are water intense crops as well, or stuff that actually is coming from the Midwest, in the case of poultry and chickens, right? So you're eliminating some of those fossil fuels and feeding them something local. Of course, I still need to get the poultry industry on board because this is really fresh and new research. So we're going to hear from me. But they're great opportunities to actually, share our water footprint with them as well. So the other thing that we have going on is with the shell. The shell has a lot of really interesting options at this point. There's a couple processes called pyrolysis or torrefaction. And it's kind of like this, you're not burning it, you're superheating it. You're kind of changing the properties of it. And so when you do that, you can actually make, it's kind of like, well, you've maybe heard of carbon black or, the torrefied shell. You can put them into low quality plastics that, from recycled material that normally people are like, well, we can't do anything with that material because it's just not quality enough for our needs. Well, when you put in torrefied shell, and even to some extent put in just Roundup shell because of the fibrous properties, you actually create stronger product, and you add heat resistance to it as well. So plastics are the way, are one of the directions that we can go as well. Nobody's, you know, the information is there, the research has been done. It's just a matter of people wanting to invest in it and grow these areas and these opportunities. I'm giving you guys all some like real good pointers for businesses. There is a company down in Merced. It's called Origin, and they are doing something really cool. So they're doing pyrolysis, which is that heating process. And they're using almond shells, and they have 4 different products that come off of it. Their main product that they're interested in is a pyroligneous acid, and that actually it's a biostimulant. So it's being used by chemical companies in natural formulations for plant growth stimulation, and probably in fertilizer, natural fertilizer chemistries. The other one is the biochar, and actually I just bought a ton of that, mixed it in with compost, and spread it on our orchard that we just did whole orchard recycling on. So I'm trying to build soil and putting in more carbon. It's supposed to be, help maintain moisture in the soil, but also reduce, actually, when you put fertilizer on, a lot of it volatilizes. That's what the hard word you can say. It goes up into the air, so you're losing the efficiency of, a very expensive product. And biochar can actually help with some of that, according to a few studies. So there's that, and then there is a syngas, which is that, you think, it's oxidated gas, but no, this gas is actually, it stays within the system and then it runs the whole system. And so they're not even really, they're not even using like electricity and power from the grid, because once they get the whole thing started up and going, they're actually just fueling themselves the whole time. The last one is a sort of tarry, oily substance. And they recently did a UC Merced capstone project, and they came up with asphalt, and they replaced the petroleum product with the tarry oil, and it actually made a better quality asphalt than what we, the product, that is normally made from petroleum. So a lot of really cool stuff going on in that area. So there is an opportunity going forward, with changing the way we harvest almonds. So, we've been harvesting off the ground for a while, and you know what it's like in the valley during the summer. The air quality gets pretty bad, although this year was not that bad. We didn't have that many fires, so that was very pleasant. But we're really trying to reduce our dust by 50%. And part of that is going to be being able to harvest off ground, which will be a game changer. So first of all, once it's off the ground, we don't really have to worry about leaves on the ground so much. So that will take out some of our, dependency on herbicides to keep that ground clean. Some of the almond holes, which will now not be hitting the ground, are never going to be rolling around in that dirt. So there is the possibility, actually, that the almond hole can be used for human consumption. Now, I know, okay, I don't know if you've ever tasted almond hole before. You would never want to eat one. They have so much lignin in them, and they're bitter. But actually, the cow can eat them. They have 4 stomachs. They can handle all that. But there are actually a ton of antioxidants in almond holes. So there is a lot of nutritional value there. We just have to figure out, and it has been done, how to extract it and how to use it. And that is something the Almond Board is looking at. Let's see. So, but one of the problems with getting to that place where we're doing off-ground harvesting is there's a whole slew of problems that just sort of snowball when you do that, because now all of a sudden you're going into an orchard, and we used to shake the trees and they would sit on the ground and dry out for a while. Well, now what do we do with all these kind of green wet nuts? We can't stockpile them because that moisture in there will start start the decomposition process, and then it'll ruin all your nuts. So we have to figure out how to dry them. I'm actually working on a capstone project right now with UC Merced kids, and it is a drying project. And the challenge I gave them is figure out how to dry these nuts by using ambient temperatures, because it is 100 degrees almost every day during the summer, especially when we're harvesting. So we shouldn't have to use heaters, and and airflow. We do have a lot of breeze coming through, so they've been working on that. It's a challenge, though. They learn that for sure. Every time they think they solve one part of the equation, then it's like, well, what about this? What about that? And like, oh, that's not going to scale up, or that's too expensive, or nobody's going to sign on for that. So it's a huge challenge. But you just keep moving forward, and you just kind of you keep chipping away at it. And that's what we're doing with the off-ground harvesting. So the downside of that, and here's one of the trade-offs, is if you're going to off-ground harvest, then anything that you don't catch ends up on the floor of the orchard. It probably won't be collected. And for a lot of farmers, it's like, they can't stand the food waste, Because, we kind of pride ourselves on the fact that we take everything out of the orchard.
Question?
Yeah.
So is that what the future is, that some machine is catching the things?
Yeah.
See some end up on the ground?
I know, they bounce out. So this is maybe one that might have been used for pistachios. It wasn't necessarily designed for almonds. Almonds, when they're heavy with nuts, they go like this and they kind of hang down. And as soon as you start shaking them, those limbs will and release, and then they flew nuts everywhere. Then they nut party. So, but there's some really great companies out there. Engineering is such a great area to go into. You have so many interesting problems to solve. One of the things I always encourage people going into engineering to do is, it's great to design a whole piece of new equipment, that it's $200,000 for that equipment, but if nobody can afford it, then, you're not going to make that much of a difference. However, if you're very clever and you figure out how to retrofit people's old equipment with, say, this, some sort of attachment that goes on the harvester that knocks out the disc. Because do you want to sell 10 units at 200,000, or do you want to sell 10,000 units at 20,000? Because I will tell you, it's for a farmer. I mean, these are huge, especially small ones like us. You just don't have a million laying around on equipment. We want to make these changes, and we want to go forward and do things, greener, cleaner. That's where I get to this. So perhaps not everything is doom and gloom, and there are some good guys out there. What do they call the allied forces? I don't know. Star Wars fans here. Anyways, for those guys, right? I'm going to tell you a couple of feel-good stories as I close out. We had a little plot that was between the house and the barn, and we had trees there in the old orchard, but it was just a pain in the butt to harvest and move equipment around because it was small and it was tight. And it was like, oh, we don't want to replant that anymore. So I said, we're going to make it into pollinator habitat. And so we planted wildflowers there, and then I had the opportunity to get milkweed plugs. And I planted the first type of milkweed. It didn't take off so well, but then I got the narrow leaf milkweed, and I figured out a better way to plant it. And it's as tall as me now, and it's only in a year or two. So in just a short amount of time, it's a couple of years we've had it, I now see this here on the top, on the sunflower, that is the California longhorn bee. And that is actually a bee fragment. So, I'll just tell you a little story about this particular species. The males all hang out together, and in the evening they all cluster together in their frat house or sunflower frat house. And then the females all live different. So, but it's kind of cute. And then this, I think you guys all recognize that. That's the monarch butterfly. So this year, it's just my second year of having milkweed. I have had 5 monarchs come through the property. So, and we have 1 egg. So I have a group that comes and actually, does transects and is looking at the populations there and studying. And they have found an egg. So, well, they didn't tell me which plant it was on, but I keep going out there and looking for them. So, but that, I literally never had milkweed before, but I never saw monarchs on the property. So we have this opportunity with farmland to still be part of the ecosystem, even if it means just taking a little part and doing a pollinator habitat or putting on an edge, putting hedgerow. And I was in fisheries and wildlife. One of the things that we learned about were corridors for wildlife and how it helps them move, especially in their migrations. Well, the nice thing about a lot of insects is that they fly. And so the valley could really have this, corridor, this patchwork, right? And these corridors throughout the valley to help some of the native species and the beneficial insects survive, even when we're still doing, So that's just a picture of wildflowers. I do the edges of the property with wildflowers. A, so I like to look at it. And as habitat in the spring, because any native pollinators that I can bring into are just gonna help my bottom line. It's a really easy way to do it. So, I talked about some of the different avenues that you could go down, the careers in this sector, and of course there's engineering, there's biotech, there's biochemistry, there's plastics, byproducts, the residues. That's fascinating. And don't forget about food science. Food science, because now, everything that we can pull out of the field and use for food is a bonus, right? So, food waste is so huge throughout the world, and especially in the United States. And if we're gonna have food insecurity, maybe we can eliminate some of that with actually, reducing some of the waste that we see in agriculture. So the future may seem bleak at times, and this summer I definitely thought maybe I should go all Lexapro for my climate anxiety, but I didn't. Just like breathe. But as young people, the one thing I want to say to you, and I'm going to make sure we get this right. You're looking to have an impact, and your education, the path you choose right now, you've never been so important when it comes to climate change. So I just want you to know that. I know it's a lot of pressure, but but you guys are our future. You can do this. So that's it. If you have any questions, I also have materials here for you guys to take a look at, and some stickers if you like stickers. Some board has collaboration going on with increasing, and they're working actually with Project Aegis and
He's so hard out to see. You understand.
I did, I cut it.
they're the ones who are really starting to see the increases. So this year, Rory, who runs that program, I think you're gonna start seeing more because of the president starting again.